I think anytime you go through change isn't easy. And I think when you go through change, you're going to have people get on and off the bus, as the saying goes. But the team here, we did lose some people that weren't ready to get on the new bus, that still wanted to do the work, that just kind of maintained people, that fed people, but didn't change their lives. So it took a little while to transition, but mostly it's a benefit because for two reasons. The staff we have are very talented and professionally trained, but they want to have an impact and a better impact. They don't want to work at a place where all we're doing is maintaining people where they're at. They also know that we're innovative and we're willing to try new things. And sometimes historically in the nonprofit world, we kind of kept doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So because of when we serve participants, we have to be smarter today than we were yesterday because we want to have a greater impact on their lives.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart and Hustle Podcast. Today, I am joined by another amazing leader who's going to talk about what impact truly means. Now, if you're a leader who participates in the nonprofit space, you know how challenging it can be to truly quantify what the impact is that you're having on your community. Scott Walker is the CEO of Lifewise St. Louis. And guess what? He has an understanding for what impact means. Scott, welcome to the show, man.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Scott, my question for you as we kind of get started here is, what do we need to do to reevaluate what impact truly means in the nonprofit sector? What do you think about that?
Well, I think we need to understand the definition of impact versus outcomes. And so much historically in the nonprofit world, we talked about outcomes. And for so long in the nonprofit world, the outcome was I served 11,000 people. And that's really an output, not an outcome. And certainly not impactful and standing alone by itself.
So here's my question for you. Now, when you were in fifth grade, I'm sure your teachers asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up, Scott? You might have said a firefighter or a baseball player. Often you don't say, I'm going to be the CEO of a nonprofit organization. So how did you kind of get to where we're at here today?
Well, you know what? I did spend a lot of time, 21 years in the corporate world. But during that time and volunteering and being engaged with nonprofits, really developed a passion for that, and also really out of knowing what I had growing up, what my kids were having growing up, and realizing that so many other kids and adults didn't have that opportunity, really drove my passion towards work in the nonprofit.
And what were some of the experiences that you think you had in your previous life in the corporate world that you've been able to bring over into this space?
Well, I think the fact that I also had the opportunity in the corporate world to travel throughout the United States, because I supervised at any given time the whole United States for a retail division, but to be able to see different cultures, different areas of cities, good and bad, and then also just to be engaged in your own city here in St. Louis, you get to see quite a few things different. When you see things here at Lifewise, I can see the arch from my office. And we have kids in our neighborhood that have never been to the arch.
Really?
You know, and when you have, and there are examples like that day in and day out of what a small world so many of our families and kids have lived in and not had the exposure.
And how does that make you kind of feel, knowing that you've been able to see so much of the world? Do you think that there are limitations that people kind of put on themselves who haven't been able to see the arch, who live so close to it? Or what are some of the factors that kind of contribute to them not being able to explore how they should?
You know, I think a lot of it is knowledge that they can. Obviously, financial is a big piece of it. And having a life scheduled out in a controlled way that you're not in a crisis mode too much of the time to create opportunities for good things to happen.
You know, creating opportunities is something I'm very passionate about. We talk a lot about the framework of challenges versus opportunities. When you came to the organization, I know that you were involved in the board before you took the role as CEO, right? You were president of the board.
Correct.
Then they called you in to, make the changes that were necessary. When you got into the organization, what were some of the opportunities of change that you saw as low-hanging fruit that maybe somebody else would kind of pose as a challenge?
Well, I think the thing of realizing that, let's just talk about it, the most basic needs of things, food, that nonprofits have a pantry of donated food. But the reality of it is if I need food today, I'm probably going to need food tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So how do you get and create opportunities so they aren't dependent on your food pantry for a day, a week, a year, a lifetime? Because otherwise you're never going to put yourself out of business. And while we never will, in the nonprofit world, we should have that as a goal in mind, theoretically.
I was speaking to an amazing leader of a behavioral health organization in Cincinnati last year, and he said that exact phrase to me. He said, Keaton, I have a little bit of a contrarian view on how we run our business. Everybody wants to say, how are we going to grow? My biggest objective is saying, how am I going to put us out of business? Because if we do what we need to in our community, there shouldn't be a need for us. Are we going to come across a reality where that's something that we can actually lean into? Probably not, but I come through embracing my team and supporting them so we can go out of business. And it's really refreshing to hear you say that too.
Well, it is, and because the reality of it is we won't be ever out of business because not everybody is going to have the skill set or the desire, put the time in to getting their life where they want it to be. But is what we need to do is those that want to put in that time, that have the drive, that have the passion, that just may not have the knowledge or the expertise or the exposure, we need to give every one of those individuals the opportunity to reach their potential.
Is there a little bit of a misconception working in the nonprofit space, specifically with the demographics who you guys support? I feel like in society's view, there's often a idea, if you will, that a lot of people just don't want to be the provider for their home. They want to continue to lean on subsidized services, on welfare, on food banks, on community services, because that's just what they want to do. Is that always true?
Not at all. I think there are people like that, partially because they don't know any different. They've been in multi-generational situations that's all they've ever seen. But I think by and large, the majority of folks want to be the provider for their family, want a better life, do not want to live on government assistance. It's not a glamorous life to live. And they want to grow and see opportunities and want something better for their own kids. Part of it is that so many of our families have never seen success modeled or exposed to it in a large scale way.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, if I live in a housing complex, let's say, and nobody ever graduates high school, then why would graduating high school be a goal for me? But if I live in the neighborhood my kids grew up in, where everybody was expected to graduate from high school, and for the most part, almost everybody did, then those are life-changing differences in where I live and what I'm exposed to. They're going to affect me for the rest of my life.
One of my favorite sayings is, you lead others by letting them know what you expect of them, which often may exceed what they expect for themselves. Give people a reputation they can live up to. I'm hearing a little bit of the magic is in the stretch, right, in that statement.
Yes. It's to create, it's partnering. Getting yourself out of poverty is a tremendous amount of hard work. But everybody that is successful had a team behind them or had parents behind them or a teacher behind them or somebody that when they screwed up, let them get back up and kept them marching forward. So many of our families don't have that. And in many cases, the nonprofit sector fills that role. And we certainly try to fill that role at Lifewise by letting our families and our scholars get back up if a mistake is made or if they stumbled, and keep them marching forward and not make that one mistake a lifetime penalty.
There was something that you said in our previous conversation and at the beginning of today, which was, thinking about impact and saying 11,000 people served, right, is an output, not an outcome. But there were some outcome stats that you shared with us last time, which was absolutely amazing. In 2023, the measurable impact that Lifewise St. Louis had was 9 home purchases, 6 car purchases, 2 new business started, and 4 home repairs completed. Why are those numbers so important compared to the 11,000 people served?
Well, and that happens to be just one of our programs, but it's important because that is mobility. That is people accomplishing the goals in their life that are going to change not only their life, but change the generations ahead in their life. And that's the key. There's changes you can make that kind of stabilize you where you're at, but there are changes that are made that can move you forward for generational. A house is an example. When we often think of folks in poverty that we need to do financial literacy. But if they're not buying a house, they aren't also creating equity and generational wealth. And that's how you move families forward, multi-generational, through generational wealth. And all of us take that for granted that have it, whether it's through savings or home equity or insurance policies. Those are all things that most of our participants don't have an opportunity historically for.
I'm really interested to think about, all of your experience in the corporate world and how it's impacted the nonprofit business that you run today. So one of the things that we talked about in a previous conversation, which was, it's often that we have helping people. We have amazing giving individuals who work inside of a nonprofit, but they're not used to having their business run like an actual business. So how and what type of changes did you make to kind of run Lifewise like a business and not so much like a nonprofit?
Well, I'd say two ways. It started out with our staff. In the nonprofit world, anybody that's working in there has amazing passion to help. But in the reality of it is, they really is what we need in the nonprofit world, at least leading and key positions, is professionally trained staff with a passion. And that's the way a business operates. You get a person that's an expertise in accounting. You get an expertise in graphic work. You get an expertise in every aspect of a business. But in the nonprofit world, that wasn't really the case historically. So we went from having 2 social workers on staff to 18 who are professionally trained, most all master's level social workers, who can work with our participants and are professionally trained and have understanding in the toolbox to help them move forward.
But there was something else that you guys did as well, because you guys implemented a social work tracking software as well, right? That kind of transformed the way you guys looked at data within the organization too.
Absolutely. So historically, like we started out, our outcome was we served 11,000 people. But the reality of it is that's not an outcome, it's an output. But we brought in a social work software. We weren't the first, but early on that move, where we can set up and track every program and our participants and what their success is and how they're moving forward, so that we can document that, not only to learn from, but to use towards getting additional funding to do even more good work.
Was it an easy transition when you came in and started suggesting, I would say, private sector tools like software to help us be able to better visualize our data and things like that? Was the organization supportive, or was there any resistance that you had to overcome? Any lessons that you could share with us in making such a big transition?
Well, I think anytime you go through change isn't easy. And I think when you go through change, you're going to have people get on and off the bus, as the saying goes. But the team here, we did lose some people that weren't ready to get on the new bus, that still wanted to do the work, that just kind of maintained people, that fed people, but didn't change their lives. So it took a little while to transition, but mostly it's a benefit, because for 2 reasons. The staff we have are very talented and professionally trained, but they want to have an impact and a better impact. They don't want to work at a place where all we're doing is maintaining people where they're at. They also know that we're innovative and we're willing to try new things. And sometimes historically in the nonprofit world, we kind of kept doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So because of when we serve participants, we have to be smarter today than we were yesterday, because we want to have a greater impact on their lives. So having that kind of environment also creates some benefits with staff as well. But there's nothing better than seeing somebody who's worked real hard achieve their goals and buy a house or buy a car. So our team finds that type of work very, very rewarding, whether it's that work or working with our seniors or in our therapeutic work or working with our youth development teams or early child center. When you see people prosper and achieve things in a good life, it's very, very rewarding in that way.
I mean, we're talking about sustainability, right?
Yes.
Just parachuting in and parachuting out doesn't give us the sustainable results that we're looking for. But you also used a word incredibly intentionally there as well, Scott. You said participants. Why did you choose to label the individuals you guys serve as participants?
Well, because our participants are highly active and very hardworking. And if you call them, in my opinion, clients, then you're putting yourself above them. Where participants, they are equal and we are walking together. and working together on whatever their goals are. The other piece of it is like I said, hardworking. When our old transactional programming, we may see a participant in the building 3 times a year on average to a coaching session or to a class. Today, our participants are average 49 times a year in the building in a coaching or a classroom environment. So they are participating heavily and are the major drivers of their success. And we're just walking with them and supporting them and helping supply the tools for them to reach those goals.
Scott, how do you get such incredible, I would say, raises in trajectory of participation and stickiness, right? From 3 to 49, something in the middle had to happen.
Well, I think it's the relationship. And our staff have very deep relationships with our participants. It's like I said, it's not a transaction. It's not go pay for my groceries and I'm out the door and I don't know the cashier. Our participants develop deep relationships with our participants, and they know that they're in their corner and supporting them and cheering them on, per se, because that's what creates success and for all of us.
Well, one of the things I'd like to talk about is some of the differences maybe that you've recognized in the nonprofit sector compared to the corporate world. One of which is CEOs have to wear a ton of hats now. You have to be not only the vision caster, but you also have to be the gap filler, the fundraiser, and everything else that comes along with that. So how have you been able to kind of settle into this role as CEO of Lifewise with all the additional responsibility and the creativeness that you need to fulfill on the mission?
Well, it's obviously a challenge, juggling a lot of different balls. I mean, today I've done facility work, I've done fundraising work, I've done collaborative work, and that's just until I get to my desk. And I often say in the morning I plan my day, and when I go home at night, I realize I probably only got to 20% of what I planned because so many interruptions came in. But at the same time, that makes the job interesting. But also, for me, it's important that I make sure my staff are not bogged down with details and backed up drains and things like that so that they can focus on the work they're doing, which is direct frontline work with our participants. So at some level, it gives a lot of variety, but it also, some level, it keeps you challenged and moving at all times.
I think it's an amazing point for me to kind of ask you about the new generation of team members who you have to attract and retain within the organization is much different from where we were 15, 10, 20 years ago. A new generation of people want to be connected to mission. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be validated. One of my favorite books is a book by a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk. He goes by Gary V on social media. Came out with a book in 2022 called 12 and a Half. And the entire book was about the soft skills, empathy, compassion, tenacity, curiosity, and why those skill sets were going to be so important for leaders of the future generations, because touching on those soft skills is so important. How do you kind of think about the necessity for those soft skills when you're leading the organization with a different generation of people?
Well, it's the difference between your success and not success. We're a changing world. Every generation has different priorities and different needs. And you better be adaptable to manage multiple generations at a time in that way, because for those individuals, they're all valid needs and valid wants. And in a way, that's good because it also keeps us more creative. We get out of boxes. We learn from each other. We learn to be more adaptable. And those are all important traits to have.
I think if we're going to be able to meet the needs of the communities that we serve, we have to be steadfast on where we're going, but flexible on how we get there. And so one of the things I love bringing into these conversations is I was listening to a podcast one time. A keynote speech by Jeff Bezos. And he was talking about the difference between decisions and experimentation. He said, often when we are a part of an organization and we make decisions together, those decisions feel final. And if we have to backtrack, it can feel like a failure. But if you run experiments in the organization, our mindset changes. And he said, let me tell you about one of the biggest experiments we've run at Amazon. It was a $690 million experiment, and it failed. We tried to create the Fire phone to compete with the Apple phone and the Google Pixel. It failed. We had to shut it down, but we did get Alexa, and we also got the Kindle out of that experiment. What do you think about the necessity to create a culture of experimentation to do things differently and to create that culture of, I would say, experimentation, but also flexibility in how you guys get to where you guys are going?
I think it's key to success, quite honestly, of any organization, whether it's a business or a nonprofit. And I think one of the things as a leader, my job is to say yes 99% of the time, so that the team can go out and try new things and try and have a greater impact. And if you treat it as something that you try and it fails, then it's a learning curve. And it'll make us better in the long run, and it'll make us better in our next step out of the box. But I really do think that we have to be creative. We have to think that we're smarter today than we were yesterday and have learned from yesterday. So we should be growing and trying new things and experimenting for greater impact, because that's what it's all about. We want to touch more lives in a more impactful way.
Have you always had that mindset in business, in your corporate career, or is this something you kind of came into with an understanding as you became more seasoned?
I think the higher up you go, the easier it is to do because you have a broader area. When I was younger and at lower level management positions, then I think a work ethic and high expectations and setting higher standards plays a good foundational role. But the higher up you go and the more leadership people you are over, then you have to be more creative because everybody's different. Everybody's buttons need to be pushed differently and react and respond to things differently. So you better be multidimensional.
There's a CEO who I was listening to the other day. His name is Jason Fried. He is the CEO and founder of a company called 37 Signals. They created a platform called Basecamp, which is kind of like a Slack, if you will, a lot of people use. And he said, one of the things that I've realized as I've gotten more mature in my entrepreneurship and business journey is I realized the role of the CEO is often to inject risk into the organization. And now when I heard that, I was like, wait, risk, what do you mean? He was like, everybody who is on the front lines, your upper level managers, and even your executive team, often they're not thinking about how they can inject risk into the work that they do every day by experimenting and trying different things. So you have to create that safe place to challenge people to stretch a little bit, because that's where the magic's at. And that's the first time I ever heard that from a CEO.
He is absolutely correct, because the workers are afraid to make mistakes because they're afraid of getting in trouble, because that's a culture that we've developed historically. You get punished if something doesn't go right or if something fails. The reality of it is it should be the opposite. You're never going to grow and continue to have greater success unless you get out of the box you're in today and try new things and experiment with new things. Because again, if we're not smarter today than we were yesterday, then there's a problem.
I'm really interested because you were saying that, your job as CEO is to say yes 99% of the time. How are you kind of thinking about this ever changing and evolving world of technology coming in to have an impact in spaces like yours? Artificial intelligence, right, has been all over the news over the last couple of years, but recently, because of some innovation that came out of China with DeepSeek and things like that, large language models, AI, people are thinking about them as being digital team members of the future. How are you guys kind of thinking about that tech to help you, capitalize and serve your community?
Well, we're very open to tech. Tech makes us more efficient and has better results. In the nonprofit world, you're usually 2 or 3 steps behind that. When I came into this organization to lead it in 2011, we were still using Windows 97. Because and every computer we had in the building was something that was passed down from a corporation that was 10 years old. So that's another tweak that you have to do as a nonprofit leader. You have to supply your team with the tools they need, and you don't need to operate as you live in poverty if you run a nonprofit. If nothing else, you need the opposite. Our staff needs, because we don't have a deep bench, we don't have extra players on the field. They need the tools to make their jobs as efficient as possible as they can. So anything new that makes the job easier, that gives us better information, that would have a greater impact on our participants achieving a better life, we need, and we don't need to be the last ones to get it.
Now, with one of the things I've had the privilege of is I'm 34 years old now. And as I get a little bit older, I've had the privilege of seeing patterns, right? I saw the internet come up. I saw the internet crash. I saw AI come. I saw the internet, all these type of things. Are you recognizing any type of patterns in your career when it comes to technology like artificial intelligence and all the other innovation that comes out here? Does it remind you of any other periods in time?
Not off the top of my head, it doesn't. I think probably for the biggest piece is you get back to the phone. In my generation, at my age, you went from a landline to a big old box in your car to the little thing that fits in your pocket. So that's probably the biggest transitional piece from that you see. And if you can relate that to other AI and other technology going forward at a higher rate, at a faster speed even, it's going to be amazing because of the efficiencies and the impact it'll have on life in general, not only convenience, but expertise in doing the things the right way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think we have to really hone as leaders, right, the skill set of curiosity. We have to look at these tools through a lens of curiosity and not say yes or no, but say maybe, and then try and go through the work and the time that it's going to take to fit these things into our organization.
Right. And bring people in that are more adaptable than you are to technology.
Very true. So here's a question for you. As we think about scaling impact, right, in the community, what does 2025 look like for you guys? What are some of the key initiatives you guys are hoping to accomplish? Things that you're hoping are going to be that domino that creates that windfall for you guys? What are you guys hoping for?
Well, our goal and strategically is not to open up more buildings in St. Louis to do more work. Our goal is to hire more staff and put them in other nonprofit spaces to team up with another organization to have greater impact. And that way you don't have the cost and management of buildings, and your dollars really go to frontline impact with the participants. So that's our goal. We have a goal, you mentioned earlier, our economic wellness program and the impact it has. We have a goal of doubling the number of those IDA accounts that allow people to save towards the cars, the houses, the repairs, and about 10 categories of savings overall, to double the number of people that start that program. So within a 2-year period, we'll have so many more people buying cars and houses and changing lives than even that result of 2023.
Man, it's so cool to be able to sit across this table with you, Scott. I have one of my final questions before we kind of land the plane here is, if you were able to go back in time 20 years and you were able to have a conversation with yourself about what you needed to do to capitalize on the future, things that you should get prepared for, and give yourself 5 minutes of advice, what would you say to that younger version of Scott as he was going to navigate the future to come meet me here today?
I would say take more risk and take them sooner and faster. Not be afraid to fail. I think society is a little bit more forgiving of failure today and bounces back from it than, say, 20 years ago. But I don't think we're going to get to where we need to be as a country, a nation, or as individuals unless we take more risk and get out of our comfort zones and our little boxes.
Well, Scott, we have a tradition here on the podcast as we kind of land the plane. And the question that we always love to pose is a blind question that came from our previous guest. Now, our previous guest on the podcast wanted to ask you, if you could do anything different in your career and had to choose a different segment of work to go into and invest your time in, what would it be? And what would you do in that space?
Well, good question, considering I've been in both the corporate world and the business world and the nonprofit world, so that narrows things down a little bit. But I would say probably teach, because I think the impact you have on lives as teachers is huge, and is a life-changing work that you're affecting so many. And I think today our teachers don't get enough credit, they don't get enough pay, and they have an even tougher job to do. So I would like to probably teach, but then hopefully help revolutionize that industry as well in some way, because for us here at Lifewise, education, we think, is the ticket out of poverty and can create the most impact on the future of individuals, is not only formal education, but life skill, job skill, and on.
So Scott, I want to give you an opportunity to run the last couple seconds here of the podcast as a little promotion or a commercial. How can people get involved with Lifewise? How can they find out more about what you guys do, and how can they support the mission?
Well, just the first thing we do is jump on our website at lifewisestl.org. and see the different programs we have, because we really serve babies to seniors, and have a breadth of programming, and not real narrow. It's we serve the whole width of life, and see what we're doing, because there's something there that everybody can relate to or had an experience. We have wonderful volunteer opportunities to get engaged and support. I often say nonprofit, if we were a for-profit business, we'd have a third more staff. Because we're nonprofit, we have a pretty lean beach, but there's volunteers can help and do a lot to support that. The second thing, obviously, is every nonprofit needs financial support. But the big thing is learn and educate about some of the issues we are working on and advocate for them. Write senators, write your congress people, your local city people to make changes, to make this a better place and a better world. Because if we're all more equal and closer, the better the world's going to be.
Well, Scott, it's easy to understand why you're on the show here today, because you are the definition of heart and hustle. With all the people who you're serving in your community, the advocacy, the changes, the innovation, the curiosity, it's so cool to be able to share your story, man. I can't thank you for everybody else who's tuning in, watching, and listening today. Scott Walker, thanks for joining the show, man.
Well, thank you. And I don't do it alone. We got a great team here. So thank you for having us.
All right, guys, we'll catch you in the next one.